Hello, my name is Rahila Salim, and I am one of the EdTech demonstrators here at Chorney High School for Girls. In this presentation, I'm going to look at Rosenshine's principles of instruction, and these are based on research principles which come from three areas. The first area is cognitive science, which looks at how the brain works and how it acquires information. B, it looks at research on the classroom practices of master teachers. So master teachers are those teachers whose classroom made the highest gains on achievement tests. And C, research on cognitive supports to help students learn complex tasks. The area I'm going to be focusing on is Area 6, Check for Student Understanding. Checking for student understanding was a key feature of teaching when face-to-face teaching. But now that we are doing it remotely, it's important that, again, we are still assessing students' understanding before we move on in the teaching. So what does the research say? Well, it says the most effective teachers frequently check to see if students were learning any new material. These checks provided some of the processing needed to move new learning into the long-term memory for students. And these checks also let teachers know if students were developing misconceptions within the lessons. The teachers that got their students to gain the best results were those that actually used questions effectively. They got students to summarize or repeat directions or procedures for concepts taught. Students had to state whether they agreed or disagreed with other students' answers, and they had to justify the reasoning. Students were told to think aloud as they worked to solve problems. It involved students having to write or plan essays or identify main areas in paragraphs, and they had to explain or defend their position to other students. The process or the purpose of checking for understanding has a dual purpose. A, answering the questions might cause students to elaborate on the material they have learned, and therefore making the connections and the understanding move into their long-term memory. And B, alerting the teacher to understand what parts of the material may need to be retaught to the class. Why is it important for our teachers to check for student understanding? Well, it allows students to construct and reconstruct their knowledge to learn and use what they have learned. In order for students to understand the new information, it must be connected to the existing concepts or schema from which they will construct a mental summary. So that means students need to be able to rehearse their understanding. They must elaborate on their knowledge and build those schemas, strengthening the connections between the different ideas and improving their long-term retention. This checking helps students remember more the next time they check. So why can students not check for understanding themselves? Well, when they're left on their own, the problem is students may make errors in the process of constructing the mental summary. They might introduce misconceptions, especially if too much material is included within the lesson. And students, once they have these misconceptions, it's difficult to get rid of them. Also, some students' prior background knowledge may be weak for a certain concept and therefore introduces more misconceptions. By providing guided practice after teaching small amounts of new material and checking for students' understanding, students or teachers can help limit the development of these misconceptions. So how have I used the principles in order to actually help me with my teaching? Well, when teaching remotely, I make sure that live questioning in Google Classroom or via notes is used within the lesson so students can actually have a conversation with me. I use caboodle assessments, which have longer assessment material in there, including 6-mark questions based on required practicals and concepts. I get students to correct errors and create model answers to questions. I get them to look at explain and justify type questions and collaborative tasks within Google Classroom. And I get students to actually develop mark schemes for longer answer questions so they actually understand and can develop their understanding of the concept. Some useful tips that I have for teachers is that I use the TEAP planning framework. This helps me plan out the lessons with the checking points included within the time frame. So, for example, I look at the learning outcomes of what I expect my students to be able to do, and I plan backwards. I take prior knowledge into consideration by planning those questions in. Dual coding is included within the PowerPoints, and I check for understanding within each new concept. And I try and have only 5 tasks per lesson to reduce the cognitive load. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Bye.